there has been an enormous amount of resistance, really specifically coming from the Chancellery, and not so much coming from other parts of the German government over weeks. And the amount of international and internal pressure that has been applied to Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor, over the past couple of months or so has been really, really intense.
At some point, the war in Ukraine must move decisively one way or the other. Could this be the moment? The Times reports this morning that Germany and the United States are expected to make landmark pledges to finally supply Ukraine with advanced Western battle tanks. Let's find out about the German side of that with Oliver Moody, the Times' Berlin correspondent. Morning, Oliver.
Good morning. For what it's worth, I think of you as the Anton Deck of British breakfast radio.
God bless you for that. Now, what's the politics in Germany of this? How reluctant, how much kicking and screaming are Germany being dragged into making this submission of tanks to Ukraine?
On a kicking and screaming scale, probably about a 7 out of 10.
Really?
There has been an enormous amount of resistance, really specifically coming from the Chancellery, and not so much coming from other parts of the German government over weeks. And the amount of international and internal pressure that has been applied to Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor, over the past couple of months or so has been really, really intense.
And why has his position changed? It seems to have flip-flopped because he really won plaudits, didn't he, at the beginning of the war for sort of just completely ripping up Germans' whole post-war attitude to armament, suggesting they would be a big player in this. Then he went cold, and now he's got hot again. Why has there been this vacillation?
I think the initial response, his famous Zeitenwende speech, where he said we're entering a new era and we need to step up and respond to it and spend much, much more money on defending our own country and our allies, was an attempt to get ahead of the issue. It was a recognition that this was a historic challenge and he needed to rise to it. And then since then, there has been a tendency to take the path of least resistance when faced with difficult political choices. And so what we've seen has been Germany kind of advancing in spurts where the pressure builds from its allies and from more kind of pro-Ukrainian elements within the government and the ruling coalition. And then eventually the dam bursts and they say, right, yes, we can do this after all.
And where does the public sit in all of this? What's the general mood there?
In terms of the Leopard 2 tanks, over Christmas there was a majority of German voters against it. That has now shifted. It's about 50-50. But I guess the lesson from the past nearly 12 months of this war in Germany has been how pliable public opinion is,
Yeah.
how it can be shaped through decisive and creative leadership.
Does the fact that Germany got its act together on energy, and this is my impression, it might not be true at all, have an impact on this? That if Germans had been shivering amid blackouts because of Putin's response to the war, that would have had one impact. It feels to me like that energy crisis hasn't happened so much in Germany in the end.
I think that's a pretty insightful piece of conjecture. The kind of I think a large element of Russia's political strategy in this war has been to deploy the so-called general winter as a kind of political weapon against Europe, and in particular against Germany, on the assumption that once households found themselves crippled by their energy bills or even unable to heat their homes because of gas shortages, that would drastically undermine Germany's willingness to support the Ukrainians. And it just hasn't really happened. We haven't seen that much of a shift in the polls. We haven't seen really any let up in the overall tempo of Germany's military support for Ukraine.
We're going to be talking about Ukrainian corruption in this program because Zelensky's fired 11 people, I think. And there's this question of how much we collectively in the West have lionized him and Ukraine because we have understandable enmity towards Russia. Does that get much discussed in the German discourse? Actually, the state of Ukraine, the behavior of Ukraine before the war, how democratic a government it is. Does that give him much play in Germany?
It's an absolutely huge and underappreciated factor. And I'll just give three really quick reasons why. The first is that for Scholz, it was a really formative experience way back in his political career, 20 years ago, when he was still a sort of party official in the SPD, and he got hauled up in front of Parliament to try and explain the role in a visa scandal involving Ukrainian corruption. Then secondly, one of the reasons why Angela Merkel always had such a difficult relationship with the Ukrainians was in part that she had sort of had to answer some of precisely these corruption problems. And then the third issue is that Ukraine has applied for membership of the European Union, and Germany is extremely insistent that the full kind of rigor of the criteria be brought to bear, even though some allies think that may not necessarily be appropriate. And one of the concerns there is precisely that you don't want to give a kind of backdoor to corruption into the EU.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's an issue, and we've got to find ways of talking about it in the ways that don't necessarily give succor to Russia, and how we go about doing that will be an interesting factor. Oliver, that's such a great stuff from you as ever. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Oliver Moody there, the Times' Berlin correspondent.